Hello, my name's Vanda Carter. This is your Fab Talk. It's Fab Talk number 3. It's the 3rd of May, can you believe it, 2022. And I'm delighted to welcome Brian Dolan, Professor Brian Dolan, OBE, RMN, RGN, creator of The Last 1,000 Days and End PJ Paralysis, and an astounding 20.1 thousand followers on Twitter. Welcome, Brian.
Thank you. It's lovely to be here, and thank you all for coming along as well to our party. All of those who joined us.
That's lovely. So you're over in the UK at the moment on holiday?
I am. No, work. No. Well, this is kind of home, really. As I say to people, I stay in New Zealand, but home is Stratford-upon-Avon and obviously the west coast of Ireland. So I'm back for 10 weeks, and then I'll be back again in the middle of September for another 2 months. So yes, I'm as happy as a wasp in a jam jar right now to be back.
Fabulous. That's very good. So as usual, I've only done two talks as yet, but I thought I'd start off with a few minor questions. Is that okay? So I've tried to sort of look into your background a little bit, Brian, and make it, relevant to yourself. So let me start. So disco or drum and bass?
Drum and bass, definitely drum and bass.
Film or book?
Book every time.
Guinness or Foster's Lager?
Oh, geez, I'm gonna have to think for a microsecond of that one. Guinness, of course.
All Blacks or Ireland?
Oh, Ireland, absolutely. You see, we're tribal. No matter where you stay, you're tribal to your own always.
I hope I've pronounced this right. Lamingtons or lemon drizzle?
Neither, if I'm honest, but I have to go for Leamington. I'll go quietly with Leamington, which I think is a Kiwi. Yeah, sorry, it's a New Zealand. It's Australian, isn't it?
Australian, yeah. I was trying to find a Kiwi sort of cake, and I failed.
They do pineapple lumps and other things.
Oh, right, okay then. The home of bungee jumping is New Zealand, I believe, and zorbing. So bungee jumping or zorbing?
Bungee jumping.
Okay.
Definitely bungee jumping. I've done zorbing.
Again, my New Zealand investigations, flat white or tea?
Oh, flat white. Yep, love flat whites. Yep.
New Zealand lamb or hangi, which is a stew.
Oh, hangi. Or hangi. Sorry, beg your pardon. A hangi is kiss. The Maori word for kiss, and a hangi is meat that's cooked on stones underground. And I've never tried one, but I totally 100% would love to try that. Meanwhile, I'll stick with the lamb.
There you go. Thank you very much. So there's a few
that was brilliantly random.
Anyway.
I love that. Thank you.
So Brian Dolan, in 3 or 4 words, what do you think people who know you would describe you as?
Gosh, I hope kind, funny, and passionate.
Thank you. I think that sums you up very well. So Brian, you've said that time is the most important currency in healthcare. How do we maximise time and minimise wasted time and prioritise patients' time? So how can you give us a few tips how we can do that in a modern NHS?
So I think the first thing is, first of all, to recognise that actually it's time that is the connecting currency in healthcare. It's not money and facilities, it's time. And if you think about from patients' time, access targets are measured in time, like ED waits, waiting lists are measured in time. Time is a consequence, or harm is a consequence of time ill spent. There's some wonderful work done by Chris Moulton et al., which for patients who have spent more than 6 to 8 hours in ED, there will be an additional death for every 82 patients who are admitted. So time is harmful. If you spend too long in hospital, and this is where NPJ paralysis and deconditioning comes to the party, we know that, in fact, I've just done a quick fast facts on it this afternoon, filming with Will Dolan and Firewood Pictures and the team, is that we know that deconditioning is a harm event, and the longer you stay in bed, the more harm that prevails. So harm is a consequence of time ill spent. But it's not just about patients, it's also about staff as well. You know, the time we waste, you know, you're hunting for things, like you're running around the ward looking for an obs machine, and then you find two of them huddled together like a survivor off the Titanic. You know, going to pointless meetings, which I'm sure nobody here has ever had to deal with. You know, 70% of the NHS budget, in fact, all budgets all over the place. And I see my friend Diane Gurney, who's just come in from the United States, so welcome. But it'll be the same in the States, the same any health system in the world, because the only thing that changes in healthcare, frankly, is the accent, something I don't have. But in most countries, 70% of the budget is spent on staff salaries and wages. And they are representative of the purchase of our most important currency, which is our time. So in fact, it is time that connects it. So when we're looking to manage people's time, you know, value people's time, that means rethinking what we think about time, because 21st century literacy will not be about whether we can read or write, it's whether we can learn, unlearn, and relearn. And if we meaningfully valued patients' time as the most important currency, because while our time is busy, our patients' time is sacred. And that would mean that people would not spend needless time waiting in the back of an ambulance, waiting to get into an emergency department, waiting to get out of an emergency department to get into a hospital bed, waiting to get out of a hospital, because we're still decades on, still doing TTOs where the ward rounds happen, and for various reasons
they for tablets.
They do, and you know, to my mind, we don't let them go home because we haven't done our bit. So is that just not hostage taking? Are we not holding them hostage until we do get our act together in healthcare systems? And there's some wonderful work being led by Hilary Garrett and others from Team CNO, and what that's about is how do we recalibrate our thinking around discharge and rethink what we do and know about discharge as well. So those are all of the elements. And I think the first starts with, it's almost this question, which is crucial to the last 1,000 days, which is, if you had 1,000 days left to live, how many would you choose to spend in hospital? And if we really focused our energy around time, we would find ways of short-circuiting all of the waste of people's time. That's quite
a profound way of looking at it, isn't it, Brian, rather than targets and money, which are important, granted, but measuring elements of care in time, that's really profound.
Well, thank you. And I'd like to hope so. And you know, doing some work now with Somerset Health System. Lucy Knight, Dr. Lucy Knight is a geriatrician down that way, and the wider team around how can we start to look at valuing patients' time from a system level. And you're absolutely right, Vanda. This is about rethinking how we can, you know, it's not about the measures per se, because you can hit the target and miss the point. It's, do we need to rethink the measures that we've got? And here's the saddest bit of all. I was one of the people, like many, big supporter of the NHS reforms of 2000, which brought in targets. Unfortunately, it was the narrative that was problematic.
Absolutely.
Because if they'd started talking about targets, if they talked about these are standards a civil society should value, because this is about valuing staff time, it's about valuing patient time, it's about improving patient safety, improving their experience. And also, when something works for patients, it always works for staff. If that was the narrative, then maybe there wouldn't have been the level of pushback and the transactionalism where the target became the goal, not the improved experience.
Absolutely. And I'm sure many people agree with you, Brian. So tell me about young Brian. In Ireland growing up, what were your aspirations growing up? Would you ever imagine when you began your career where you would be now?
No, you don't. And I think I was saying before we came on to you and the wonderful Terry Porritt, I don't think people necessarily start out aiming to be leaders. I think people start out aiming to make a difference. You know, because as I often say, I was born when I was very young. I'm not dead yet. And I'm very grateful for it, but I didn't plan it. I think my career has essentially consisted of just saying yes. And I didn't see any of this stuff, but my class and I, we've been 40 years, and my class are all together, our mental health nursing class. And that, I think, was a brilliant. So one thing I'm proud of is a psych nurse. And that was the foundation stone to so many things. But, you know, I think of my dad, and he used to say, I look in the mirror and I see an old man. I don't know who he is because I'm 16 in my head. And, you know, I love that way of thinking that he had about it all. But I didn't start out with this cunning plan. And I think there's a danger, you know, you say to children, oh, what would you like to be when you grow up? And I think what it does, it narrows their viewpoint, because they, oh my God, I've said I'd be a teacher, I better focus on being a teacher, I better focus on being a doctor. And then they get defined by that. And I think it's far better to say, look at the opportunities that are out there in the world for you. And there's jobs you may do that you will never, that they haven't been invented yet. My son is 24, Will Dolan, brilliant filmmaker and videographer. But when he was at school, there was no such things as drones. There was no app developers. There's drone camera people now. There's jobs that didn't exist when he was at school. So I think there's something about being receptive to opportunities, saying yes, even when you don't know quite what you're doing, but having a crack anyway, and allow yourself. I mean, I've done jobs where I failed terribly at, I was rubbish at them, but just giving yourself forgiveness to have a crack at stuff. That's kind of it. You know, I'd love to sort of say, well, first I did this, then I did it. It just doesn't work like that. And the most interesting careers are not overthought.
That's true. So looking back, Brian, what advice would you give somebody who has a super idea, a seed of an idea? What would you say to them about developing that idea and gaining traction?
I think it's, first of all, there's something to be said in having a crack at things that are really, really, really small. There's a fantastic nurse leader who's NHS trained, Andy Carter, who's now the Director of Nursing in the Royal Women in Brisbane in Southeast Australia, Queensland. And he talks about Change Tuesday. So every Tuesday to have a change, you know, the people in the at unit level have a crack at a small change, make it really small, and make it small enough that you can change it back on Wednesday. And I think what that does is it gives people a bit of confidence in negotiating about change. It gives them some confidence in having a go at something that doesn't work, and it's fine if it doesn't do so. It gives them, builds up resilience and skills and all sorts of things. And as people start to build that, they build a whole bunch of things, not least of which is, how do I get people on side? Because I don't think people mind change. What they mind is change without reason, and they mind change where they're not in control. And what is the most important bit about change is not about the change, it's about people. And actually the goal isn't change, the goal is the goal.
Yeah.
And too often what people do, they set up this, you know, they'll set up a 6-month project plan, there's Gantt charts all over the place, and there's project details and stuff like that. And that's about 80% of it. And on the morning of a big launch, by the end of the morning, the dog on the street can tell you this isn't going to work, but people put their time, their effort, their ego into it, and they don't want to let go. And we've all seen that. 70% of change efforts fail. 25%, if you look at John Cotter's work, limp along, you know, reasonably, you know, somewhere here and there, and only 5% are very successful. And the change, you know, instead of 80% being about Gantt charts and project planning, and 20% about motivating and inspiring and encouraging, those percentages should be the other way around, because it's really about the people. And just because people ask questions, it doesn't mean resistance. What it means is people are processing, people are thinking about it, you need to circle back. And even the most rigid people have moments of openness. So just because somebody says no, it may be just no for now. And then just take time and circle back.
You touched on something there about relationships and building that network and getting people on board with your ideas, and it does work, doesn't it?
It does, and I think you know, constantly fabulous Helen Bevan, you know, talks about, instead of getting people to buy into change, encouraging them to invest instead. You know, we don't like to be told, but you know, the thing is about how do we get people to be participants in that, and also strong opinions loosely held tends to work in that you are not wedded to it from an ideological point of view. It doesn't become who you are, which can make you rigid. It's about actually how do we keep changing and keep evolving, and how do we keep refining and keep it's the PDS cycle writ large, really.
Absolutely, yeah. Absolutely.
So go ahead.
You're buffering a little bit then, Brian. I was worried we were going to lose you for a moment.
Right, yeah, it's a story of my life, yeah.
No, not at all. So tell us about end PJ paralysis and the last 1,000 days projects. Where are you with them both at the moment?
So, well, I should say now that you mentioned it, so we're going to have our End PJ Paralysis Summit. Professor Linda Holt and I have just done a recording this afternoon that will go out in the next couple of days or week. And the next 36-hour End PJ Paralysis Summit will be held on the 13th and 14th of July, probably from 8 o'clock in the morning on the 13th to the 8 p.m. So it's a full 36 hours, just like last year. I'm sure we'll invite Roy Lilly because he's he's a legend himself and he's great crack. But we have a bunch of people, and this year we will have under this broad banner, if you will, of social inclusion. We will include tackling deconditioning, promoting cultures that heal and not hurt, and also stuff around reducing social isolation. And all of those fit within the orbit of End PJ Paralysis and Last 1,000 Days, which themselves have morphed over time. So I think the End PJ Paralysis was born in 2016 in the outback of Australia in Broken Hill. But the Last 1,000 Days I've been talking about for some years beforehand in Christchurch and then everywhere. And in fact, I have to acknowledge that just outstanding academy of Fab NHS stuff, because it was through the academy that the Last 1,000 Days really flourished. And I do want to acknowledge Pete Gordon, who was a real important part of those early days with it over here, because it is about, if you will, if the last 1,000 days, which is about what would you do if you had 1,000 days left to live, how do you value patient's time? We all understand those things. What operationalized that valuing of time was End PJ Paralysis. And I've been thinking for years, this ephemeral, ethereal construct of the last 1,000 days, which I'm really proud of, how do we bring it into something that a ward clerk, a porter, a staff nurse, an allied, a junior doctor, a manager, everyone can start to be part of? And I'm just really excited for the future. It doesn't end, we have had a second pandemic in the form of deconditioning in people's own homes. In fact, we've had a parallel pandemic of loneliness and social isolation through lockdown. So our work is a long way from done. We have so much work collectively to do. And what's important is it's a we thing. I may have created them, but I'm really clear, I don't own End PJ Paralysis. I don't own Last 1,000 Days. Because I don't own them, that means anyone can own them and nobody needs my permission. And that's what's really important. Knowledge hoarded is knowledge wasted. You don't hold on to stuff. Give it away, and then people might like to join you.
So that switches very nicely into my next question. What's important to you, Brian?
Reducing suffering.
Okay.
See, we've all had a tough couple of years, every one of us.
Indeed.
Some have been in yachts, some have been in dinghies with a broken oar. There's not one of us, none of us have escaped the challenges of the last 2 years. Nobody. We all have stories to tell. I spent over 2 years not getting home to see my family. And reducing suffering, to my mind, the ambition of Last 1,000 Days and PJ Paralysis is about, why shouldn't we be ambitious enough to rethink about what we think about health systems and time? Why shouldn't we be ambitious enough to say, not only is it not okay to leave somebody lying in the back of an ambulance for hour after hour, lying on a hard hospital trolley for hour after hour, stuck in a hospital bed, waiting to be up. Why can't we believe in ourselves enough? In fact, I do believe we can believe in ourselves enough that we can change our health system. Why shouldn't we be ambitious enough? Because one day, we're all going to wake up And instead of delivering the care, we'll be receiving the care. So we need to start now. The urgency, you know, purpose is an incredible alarm. And when you are connected to purpose and others connected to that purpose, then cumulatively, there's nothing to stop us succeeding. And there's a wonderful line by Samuel Beckett, which I hold dearly to, which is, perhaps my best years are gone, but I wouldn't want them back, not with the fire that's in me now.
Mm.
And I think that's what keeps me going, is that desire to just reduce suffering, just like everyone else on this call does.
What would you say to the nursing and midwifery health visitor workforce who are tired right now? They're really fatigued and really feeling the 2 years. It's been tough, and it's just getting harder and harder. And now the target's about getting the waiting list down. They're feeling very vulnerable at the moment. What would you say to them, Brian, at the moment?
No, well, first acknowledge it, you know, because just throwing in, oh, you know, now we've got to, we're done with COVID, thanks. Well, it's not done with us. No. So can we just go back to BAU, back to business as usual? By the way, we're going to batter the bejesus out of you if you don't hit those targets. That is singularly unhelpful. It's not kind. It's not even remotely respectful. So it's acknowledging that. But it's also, there's a great line by the Irish poet and philosopher John O'Donoghue, who talked about, you know, being gentle with others, but excessively gentle with yourself. And I think we let go of the things we can't control. And sometimes it's easier that that's their behaviors, their attitudes, the things we have no control over. And putting our energy into those things, and they only may be small things, but they're things nonetheless that we do have control over. And that's our own attitudes, our own behaviors, the things we do control. Because I think we're all guilty of putting so much energy into that. You know, Stephen Covey talks about the circle of concern, that it's, you know, sometimes honestly you might as well just go outside and shout at the clouds.
Absolutely. We're very good at pointing problems out, but not so good at sort of finding solutions for those problems, are we?
Well, and it's more than solutions to those problems. It's solutions for the problems that we can do something about.
Absolutely, yeah.
So, you know, in my many nefarious lives, I was an executive director in the NHS, but also, which is still unusual for nurses to do this, a clinical director of a couple of emergency departments. And I would say to the team, now look, we can't do anything about the wards, but we can do stuff about the patients that only we see. You know, and if you focus on the energy of that, actually it reduces stress levels, because folks think somebody else is dealing with that. I don't have to expend energy on it. I can put the energy into the things that we do stuff about. We can do stuff about.
Can make a difference, yeah.
Yeah, and the narratives, the stories we tell ourselves really shape our life experience. You know, and this isn't to decry the intensity of work, but I never, you know, when people, do you ever when people say to you, how are you? And people say, oh, I'm fine, thanks. Or in Ireland, obviously, you're grand. Well, you know, what do people say now? How are you? Oh, busy. And it feels like a busy off. And, you know, like, well, look, you were shipwrecked, I was drowned. So it turns into this narrative of overwhelm. And I choose to say to people, when it's just, how are you? I'll say intensely fulfilled. And I think it may seem glib, but it's also about a story I tell myself, no matter what's coming at me, and there's lots, you know, a couple of books about one thing or another, it actually just is a calming effect, because it says to me, I have some controls over how I think, how I feel. I have some controls over this. If somebody gets angry at me, I'm never obligated to get angry back. You know, somebody, you know, we are in control and no one else. Whatever the triggers may be, doesn't stop us being in control. So I think it's having that. As father would talk about having a word with myself, and we all have to do it sometimes. And you know what? It's all right to feel. It's all right to feel miserable and blue and down. That's okay. That really is. Just give yourself permission. Just don't go visiting it so long that you've forgotten the way home.
Very true. Very true. And there's a big movement around incivility at the moment. Yes. About again, it goes back to time, doesn't it? Being a valuable commodity. Yeah. About, you know, we spend a lot of time dealing with things we don't need to be dealing with, like being rude to each other, being cross with each other, and we could be channeling that energy into positive ways to make a difference for ourselves and most importantly our patients. So
yeah, 100%. And Dr. Chris Turner, who's got the Civility Saves Lives, actually spoke last year, been in touch. He's going to come back and speak at our summit again this year, and he is worth his weight in petrol, you know. And this is new science. There's stuff around incivility, but you are 50% less likely to help someone even if you witness incivility. And I'm not talking about screaming, just incivility. This work, you know, initiated by Christine Porritt in the States, and it's exploded. And what I love about Chris, when he did, and if you get a chance to look at his TED Talks, so look up Dr. Chris Turner if you're watching, or look up, I think it's When Incivility kills people, something to that effect. You'll find it on a TEDx. He talks about, we used to think of smoking was fine, so much so doctors would say, you know, if you don't smoke, maybe you should, it'll ease your nerves. I think the direction of travel is that incivility will be seen as the new smoking of the 22nd, of the 20s and beyond. And that kind of gives me hope as well, because if you can't see it, you can't deal with it. And first it's about, because circles back to the beginning of the question, really, we have to acknowledge it as well.
Absolutely. I'm going to bring my friend Terry, if she's listening.
Hello, Terry.
She's got a question for you, and I think it's probably better coming from Terry. Are you there, Terry?
Yep, I'm just.
Would you like to ask Brian your question?
Well,
good
Brian,
evening.
Thank you for bringing up Brian. I listen to you, and I always learn something, always. And what really is like food for the heart for me is listening to you talking about the importance of caring, about the important aspect of caring in nursing, not about the expert skills, which we do need, not about our technical abilities, the bits of machinery or investigative treatments we can do, but about care. And I wondered what feeds your philosophical or theological view of nursing, and how did you develop that?
Gosh, it's such a big question, and I think there's a line I came across many years ago, which I think is very true, that while not every reader is a leader, every leader reads. And I think it's really important we keep a big, broad hinterland of reading in all kinds of spaces to inform us, enrich us, and help crystallize our often nebulous thinking. I mean, I suppose as part of the answer is because I'm an Irish Catholic with a PhD in guilt. I think that you are shaped by the environment that you're raised in. And I suppose also being a psych nurse, I think may well have shaped this as well, Terry.
Yeah.
But I think there's something in just this is going to sound a bit grandiose, and I do hope it won't, but I'm fascinated by language. I'm fascinated by concepts, and I like walking around them in my head to see, is there a different way of looking at this? So, for example, we talked before we came on properly, which is about cure versus care. See, the thing is, with cure will always be trumped by care, and the reason is because the amount of care anyone can get is limited. Sorry, the amount of cure, forgive me, is limited, because death can, in the end, it must prevail. Whereas the amount of care that is needed is from before we're born to after we pass. We don't have intensive cure units, they're intensive care units, because that is the foundation stone upon which everything we've done. And with the Cartesian dualism, I think, therefore I am, therefore we split the mind and the body, and science has been seen as both the alpha and omega of all knowledge, and randomized control trials and trials are considered the gold standard, to a point where a lot of medical journals will no longer accept qualitative research, which I think is an enormous mistake. Because as the American poet Riker said, the universe is not made of atoms, it's made of stories. And it's the stories that connect us. While science informs us, science gives us the facts, the connection is the stories. In fact, my cup here, which is, if you can see, it might be back to front, it says Cod and Scale. And Cod and Scale is an Irish phrase which means, what's the story? And it's the stories that connect us. You know, something I learned fairly recently, and it's a book by an Aboriginal man called Bruce Pascoe. And I've been kicking this in my head for the last several months, which is Aboriginal people. We look at the stars and we created Aries and Taurus and Gemini. In Aboriginal people, they don't look at the stars to create the shapes. They look at the darkness. It's connecting the darkness that creates their stories. And I really, really love that, because that is about how do we choose to connect with, to engage with, and to see the world, and then embrace its diversity and its difference. So it is part theological. It's, you know, and by the way, you know, I'm not practicing anything except, you know, I think it's something you practice in your heart, not your knees. But it's about thinking and wondering, is there another way of thinking about this that connects with people's hearts? Because change is really about one heart, one mind, one conversation at a time. And change doesn't happen top to bottom. Change happens side by side. That's where it happens. And it happens with stories, stuff that makes sense to me. So I think it's about, how do we sense make the world? That's what I love to do.
Well, I think you do it incredibly eloquently, Brian. but I think also that feeds into the growing use of patient stories within nursing to actually understand services, understand perceptions of services, build on user experience. So I think that what you're saying really does highlight why patient stories, rather than just being seen as, oh, well, that was a nice comment in this, or are really being seen for the powerful tools that they are for us if we choose to read the story and listen to what it's saying. So
yeah, I completely agree, Terry. And I think the thing, you know, we all want two things in this world. We want to be seen and we want to be heard. And you know, circling back to quality improvement and all these sorts of things, is sometimes the most important thing is we stop to listen before we tell. And one of the brilliant things in nursing was, I honestly, I used to go home thinking, geez, I feel selfish because I love hearing the stories. You know, and I put a tweet out last night. It was, you know, hearing the stories of Holocaust survivors, of former POWs of the Korean War, of women who I nursed who had come from Ireland to have a termination because there was no option for terminations. And it completely terrifies me right now that the United States are looking like they're going to turn over Roe versus Wade. What is a woman's right is being taken away, you know? But those are all the stories that connect us. And when you hear patients' stories, you connect with them in a different way. And just something I do want to mention, if I may, very briefly, because it's going to be launched imminently, is a new program, which has already started in Worcester and Oxford and a few other places, called Call Me. Because 1 in 3 people don't use the name that they were born with. I mean, you're Terry to all of us, and we love you for it. But, you know, Teresa, my dad, God rest him, he wasn't William to anyone. He was Billy, but in hospital, he was William. So Call Me is a new thing we're starting. It'll actually launch next week on International Nurses. I do want to give a shout out to Dr. Mike McCabe in Worcester and Sam Foster in Oxford, the chief nurse there. And it'll launch, I think, on International Nurses Day. And watch this space, because the most beautiful word in any language is the word that is your name that you choose. And that's a story in itself.
Fantastic. Thank you. I'm not going to hog the conversation. I could go on for hours. I'm going to turn my camera and microphone off again, Vanda, but thank you.
Thank you, Terry. That was super. Has anybody else got any questions for Brian? You've been very quiet this evening.
Yes, I'm happy to take heckles. Feel free. It's brilliant to see Suzanne Arnold, the chair. I'm very honoured to be the honorary president of Agile, which is a network of physiotherapists working with older people. Again, I believe the first nurse to take that on, because, you know, and this is why I'm just feeling, by the way, while you get a chance to make comments and ask questions, please do. But, you know, we are way, way more than the sum of each other's parts. I'm really proud. I love being a nurse. But when we work as nurses, allied, doctors, my goodness, we're unstoppable.
Mm.
You know?
That's very true. Would anybody else like to ask Brian a question?
I see your names. I will come and find you. I can see Gina there, and Rupert, and and Sue and Diana.
Juliet, you've got a question for Brian. You want to turn your...
Hi, Brian.
Hi, Juliet. How are things? I can indeed,
Yes,
thanks.
I can hear you.
Hi, good, thank you. Just my question, obviously, like, you know, I've done a lot of work for the PJ, thanks for your help at Kingston. And what I'm coming up against now is just people saying that there's not enough staff on the wards, everybody's tired, and just they can't do the things that they were doing before because of the staffing levels, really. Have you got any sort of advice on how to overcome that?
Well, I hope it'll be considered helpful, but the first thing is to go back upstream and find out why we're doing this stuff. And we know that if you mobilize patients, and 95% of the time people are in hospital, either in a chair or sitting or lying on a bed. But if we mobilize people, get them up, dressed and moving, particularly the mobilization, because that's the key bit, we're reducing falls, we're reducing pressure sores, reducing harm. They are more likely to leave earlier, but equally in terms of workload, they will gain greater agency, especially if they're in their own clothes, because you stop being a patient and a mosaic of clinical detached symptoms into being a person again. So they're more likely to take themselves to the toilet. So that's one part of it. So going upstream and say, why do we do this in the first place? What's in it? Because we know if it works for patients, it does absolutely work for staff. And the other thing is then around, and I appreciate it's been difficult, especially difficult this last long while, but the most untapped resource in healthcare are patients and their loved ones and their families. So bringing them into this, because they're going to manage them when they go home. They're going to be looking after them. I've never ever come across an organization in the world that doesn't say we're patient-centered, which just raises the question always to me is, in that case, why do you have visiting hours? You know, we design our systems around our own systems and our own needs, but tapping into those people who are going to be looking after them means bringing them into the conversation as a partner to the care team. So I think those are just two bits. Why are you doing it? And going back to that and looking at the benefits again. And then the second bit is, how can we bring the family members to be part of that as well, where that's feasible and doable right now.
Thank you,
always back
Juliet.
to why.
Thank you.
Thank you. I've got a question from Alexandra Peterson. She thanks you very much for the opportunity to listen today, and she would like to ask, how do you see nursing progressing in the next 10 to 15 years with the current pressures, but also tech opportunities at play?
Oh, that's a wonderful question. So Flight Lieutenant Peterson, Sasha, who is a Florence Nightingale scholar as well, and an outstanding, we spoke, I think it was in January, Sasha, wasn't it? So where's it going in the next 10 to 15 years? I think we have to be blunt and acknowledge we're going to be in a fairly bumpy ride. And the reason is the greatest global threat in healthcare is not financial, it's not facilities, it is absolutely a people challenge. So around the world, the average nurse is now around 45 years of age, and in certain disciplines like midwifery, older people's health, operating theatres, it's an even older demographic. So the next 10 to 15 years, I think around a third of nurses are over the age of 50. So the next 10, 15 years, by just natural demographics, we will see a huge cohort of people, not just in nursing. Medicine is also facing this particular challenge. What does that mean? Well, it means we need to rethink how we think about what it is in terms of care delivery. And I have to say, I'm not I do get frustrated when I hear people that all they do is litigate the arguments and never look towards, well, here's some solutions. We know there's a global workforce crisis and real challenge, and we have to think, we need to rethink then what it is and who does what, because there is no safety when there's no patient, no staff. We also have to rethink about how are we promoting nursing and medicine as well and allied, because it used to be you'd have generations of nurses, particularly. And Mark Radford, Professor Mark Radford, is deputy CNO, he and I were chatting, his wife's a GP, and he tells this gorgeous story of that when their daughter was, some years ago now, doing her O levels and GCSEs, and they were saying, oh, what, would you like to, what would you, for your career, what do you think you might do after you've done, for your A levels? Would you think about nursing or medicine? And she's going, not bloody likely. All I've done is grown up and hearing you two talk about how hard it is. And I think that means we too have a collective responsibility to talk realistically, but also talk up our professions instead of talking them down. Because if you've got the world as your oyster as going into school, you might think, oh, geez, that doesn't sound like any kind of fun at all. So that's a part that's on all of us, acknowledging it, but there's a danger in the narrative that people will start to think it is all bad if we don't talk about the good that's in it, the connection to purpose, all the beautiful things that healthcare offers us. So that's that part of it. There is another piece of it, which is an interesting piece that's occurred, and it's this. There is a mass resignation. There is the Great Resignation, they're calling it. I think in the United States, 4.2 million people left their jobs in February. But what people are doing is a lot of people are saying there's been this huge global uptick in the number of people applying for jobs in teaching, in health, in the police services, in public services, because there's a lot of people saying, I don't want to spend my life working for shareholders. I want a life that connects to greater purpose, to be part of something bigger than just making money for outrageous sums of money for a few people. I want to be part of something that's a service life. And I think that's an opportunity for us as well. It's how do we bring in and become inclusive to the breadth and range of people who will bring in their skills and not be scared by somebody who's come out of finance to become a nurse or anything like that. So I think those are the opportunities. And the last bit of thing to answer Sasha's question, and I may need help with the last element of that, which is the next 10 or 15 years, I think we need to look at exactly what are the bits that we do and are the bits that we must always do, the bits we actually need to let go of. And then there's going to be a big bit in the grey bit in the middle of that Venn diagram. And we need to look at these things. I wrote my first book in 1993, so kind of that leaves me, just a few sets behind Florence Nightingale. And did you know in the 1950s in the nursing times, there was a blazing row in the letters pages going on about should nurses take blood pressures? And you had people writing in and doctors writing in, and that's, if you want to take blood pressure, you should train to be a doctor. Well, nowadays we practically defibrillate the coffee if it's gone cold. Practice evolves, thinking evolves, things evolve. And what is today's heresy will become tomorrow's orthodoxy, the day after is slightly old-fashioned way of doing things. So that means looking across this horizon, saying, what is out there? And we also need to think maybe the things we were really proud about of keeping people in hospital, maybe we should be even more proud of keeping them around their own homes. And look at the work of the virtual ward. If you ask the patients and their loved ones, they love it if they can have them at home. And that's not decrying the workforce challenges around it. If you start with the patient and work backwards, you create a great health system. So I hope, Sasha, that starts to answer that massive question, which I know you reflect on a lot. And I hope I haven't missed too much of it.
No, that's excellent, I'm sure. And Gina, would you like to turn your microphone on and ask your question?
Afternoon, both. Sorry, my Wi-Fi's playing up today, so hopefully you can see me, but maybe not. We'll see. I had a question reflecting on your time in New Zealand, Brian. I was really curious as to what benefits or what you saw in New Zealand that you think we should adopt over here.
So I work and still work in the Canterbury Health System in New Zealand as a rolling contractor as Director of Service Improvement. I went there in 2005 and I said I'd stay 5 weeks, and it was obviously a very Irish 5 weeks. And what I saw in the Canterbury Health System is that it became the most integrated healthcare system in the world, without, bar nothing. And what it was very much about was a bunch of things, attributes that really contributed, and one of which won't be a big surprise, which is a very, very stable leadership. The executive team, most of the executive team, for a bunch of reasons I'm not really wishing to go into just for time reasons, but a lot of the executive team left in 2020. But up to that point, most have been around for about a decade. That really does make a difference in stability terms. If the average CEO in the NHS turns over about every 19 months, it's really hard because people think, well, what's the point engaging them because they're going to be gone? And by the way, if you don't like them, keep your head down, they'll be gone in a year and a half. So that clinician engagement. The other part that was a really central part, and it ties into the first point, was the clinicians were very much about driving it. The role of the leadership wasn't about answering questions. It was about framing good questions. And clinicians trusted to come up with the solutions based on their expertise. So it was very high trust, low bureaucracy, I think was the secret sauce of that. And then David Mates, who's now in England, and Carolyn Gullery, both of them work with the Signals for Noise team, outstandingly good leaders. And I think the other thing which was lovely is an environment where there's a lot of psychological safety to have tried things. So I think all those elements combined become more than some of their parts, where you get a high trust, low bureaucracy, sense of safety to have a go at things. And money was never on the table because money drives the wrong conversations. When you get into whose cost center is paying for this, you're having the wrong conversation.
Absolutely. Thank you. That was really interesting.
Thanks, Gina.
Thanks, Gina. We've got, Fiona Holly. She wanted to say kindness and compassion is free. It's such a shame, but it's been forgotten. So thank you for that. Teresa,
I'm not sure. I could have just gone. May I quickly circle back to that? I'm not sure it got lost. It sometimes gets mislaid, and I think we sometimes need to. We tell. It's the narrative we tell ourselves as well. Elvis wasn't wrong when he said, if you're looking for trouble, you come to the right place. One thing, having lived through the earthquakes and also the mosque shootings in 2019, and it helped me as well, was the abundance of change, the vast reservoirs of kindness and compassion and decency that can be found. And I don't think you have to scratch too far to find it. But I think it's also about us as individuals. And you see, nobody on this call or nobody who's in healthcare is off duty for a heartbeat, especially if you're in any kind of leadership role. Leadership isn't a job title. Leadership is a set of behaviors. I've worked with ward clerks who are outstanding leaders, cleaners, porters. The leadership comes and the kindness comes by the behaviors, and what walks in leaders runs in teams. And there's a great line that I'll admit, I'm sure many of you here will have heard, but I didn't hear, is one Roy's blog, is altitude impacts on attitude.
That's true. I like it.
And we're always senior to somebody. So our attitude matters.
Altitude affects attitude. I like it. We've got a Teresa McCarthy. She wanted to let you know that we participated in deconditioning games in the east of England. Oh, yes. The innovation and creativity that came from some of our areas was amazing.
Absolutely. In fact, we're going to be inviting a bunch of the folks who did the deconditioning games that finished with the award things last week, and it was unbelievably. And a shout out to Geraldine Rogers, who's only one county up from me, who's in for leadership in the east of England, and Dr. Amit Arora, geriatrician, for some of that, and Josh Poole, and so many other great people there. And that was a wonderful example of people working together creatively to do some brilliant stuff. So yeah, you'll see more coming soon. So thank you for that.
Great. Suzanne Arnold wanted to ask you, how do you think we can make working with older people more attractive to new nurses and AHPs?
So this is the century of older people, and that will include us. You know, last century was around trauma and surgery and all that stuff. This is the century, and I think it's about how do we promote the stories. You know, I remember when I was a student nurse, it was, oh, Jerry's, it was almost like being sent to purgatory. You know, but what drew me to emergency care wasn't trauma. It was older people, psychiatrically unwell people, homeless people, or somebody once described as the unloved and occasionally even unlovable. So that's what I was really, really excited by when I worked in emergency care, looking after those folk. And there's this great line, I wish I could remember who said it, which is gerontologists are like archaeologists. They look past the ruins to the beauty that lies within. So circling back to Terry's point about patient stories, how do we get older people have got the greatest stories.
They have indeed, yeah.
Haven't they just? You know, the lives they've lived, the characters you've met. You know, how do we engender the excitement that actually you don't often have to do very much except shut up and listen. That's how you get people excited, when you hear the stories they tell. Sometimes they'll retell that story many a time, but you know, we're all sinners in that department. But you know, every saint has a past and every sinner has a future. So I think, you know, and the work that Agile is doing, and so it's a huge honor to be the honorary president, is phenomenal and foundational to promoting, amplifying, and celebrating through, in this instance, chartered physios, but through the inclusive nature of the work they do about bringing nurses and doctors. And also, again, the British Geriatric Society, who have opened up their membership to all folks. I'm proud to be a member of that too. These are it's the individuals and the local level to the macro level to the strategic level that acknowledges that we are all getting older as a society. We have a vested interest, and if we're lucky in this life, we're all trainee old people. So we all have a vested interest in getting it right, all of us. So
Fiona, get writing, positive thoughts, positive stories, sharing those stories hopefully will encourage the younger generation to into your speciality.
And Fiona's a fantastic example of somebody who celebrates a lot of this stuff.
Yeah, she also says we need to. Do you want to talk, Fiona, at all to Brian? She puts here, need to nurture and develop our future nurses, not put them down. It's all different to our day. Do you want to continue, Fiona?
Hello, Brian.
Hey, lovely. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. It's been lovely to hear you. Actually, it's lovely to see you, even if it's in a little box on a computer screen. I've known
yeah, this is how tall I am.
A great many years. My background is A&E, so we worked together many years ago, and I have a real passion about developing the next generation. And while I agree with you that kindness, compassion is still there, it's just sometimes people, I think, are a little bit siloed now, and they come in and they tick the box because that's all they can manage to do that day. They can't see beyond what's going on around what they've got to get done, and they become very task driven. And you know, I know people talk about nurses need to be resilient, and we're talking about nurses being burnt out at the moment, but part of me feels that actually we've got quite a large number of broken nurses out there because they've just been pushed beyond burnout. They've been pushed beyond being resilient. And I think if we don't give them that opportunity to engage with things like the restorative clinical supervision, you know, and actually nurture the next generation, then we aren't going to have people to care for us. And I've long championed the support of students and newly qualified, and I do it in my current role. But it's trying to get that message back out there. It's, you know, but we've talked about eating our young in the past, and people still do it, you know. And yet I remember when I was newly qualified, and I can name the people that kept me going and that made me realise that I could do something and I'd make something out of me. But I also remember the people that told me that I'd chosen the wrong pathway when I chose education and development, because it was not a real pathway. You know, it's really, really sad to sort of see how people can be knocked back when they've got a passion and a drive to do something. But I think that, you know, the HEIs and the NMC agreeing to put supervision in for students now is fabulous, clinical supervision. But if we don't carry that on when they qualify, these students who are going to have access to it, if we don't get it embedded and part of our normal daily life for the current staff that are there, plus the newly qualified as they come out, then we're going to find that actually we're setting up those newly qualifieds that are coming through with regular supervision up to fail, and then they're going to want to know why they haven't got access to something they had as students. So you know, I think there's so much going on, but there's so much more that could be done, and then we will get back to more of having a workforce that feels that they're enabled and empowered to do the job that they really want to do.
You're right, and there's something, I think the turnover of nursing students who don't finish has been his 25 years, 25% for decades. So we shouldn't think this is something novel. But what was really, really interesting to me was Jean White, who's now recently retired CNO. I was talking to her about it. In Wales, it's 10% is the attrition rate of students. And I said, what is it you're doing that other countries could learn from? And she said, what we focus on is pastoral care. And I think there's a lot for the HEIs, health education institutions. This is the smart place to invest, is the pastoral stuff. Too often we teach people technical stuff, but actually I'm always struck, we need to we start with kindness to yourself, because it's really hard to be compassionate to others if you're not compassionate to yourself. And that may feel a bit woo-woo, but it actually really makes a difference. And then providing that support and supervision. And never underestimate how much of an impact a throwaway line can have on someone's life. It's had if we all wrote it down, we would probably have somebody who said something that they'd forgotten 5 minutes later, they shaped us. So we have an impact, for good and bad sometimes. We all have an impact. And
Thank you so much. That was a good question. I've got Leslie here. We're running out of time, unfortunately, Brian. We've got 4 minutes left. So how do you refresh yourself, Brian, and maintain that wonderful hope-driven energy that you share so freely with others? That's Leslie.
That's a really nice, thank you for that. I think I try and practice what I preach, so I'm really kind to myself. You know, I have words, because, you know, honest to God, you know, if you talk to your friends the way you talk to yourself, sometimes you wouldn't have any, and I talk really kindly to myself. I am the happiest child I can be if I've got a book around me, or in a you know, my happiest place on the planet is actually a library, you know. So it's what is it that fills your well, and then top it up regularly. I honestly, I'd be bored going on holidays for 2 weeks. I wouldn't know what to do with myself. So I top up regularly, and that keeps me going. And I suppose it sounds almost so cliche, but that's the stuff. If you look after yourself, you're kind to yourself, and then all the usual things. Have a good sleep. I mean, I think on average an hour more sleep since the pandemic, since I read Matthew Walker's why sleep is so important, or why we sleep. I think it's all of those things. We're all work in progress. I fall over plenty of times. I'm a sinner, but I keep getting up. But I think if it's anything, and I think the other thing I would probably say, I was very lucky in that my parents were positive. They were very, very funny. I went up to their grave there when I was at home last week to say thank you again for all they did. And I think the other thing to hold on to, and particularly this is true of the last few years, it's not that we gave up in the darkness. What none of us did is we ever gave up on the light. And I think that's something we need to hold on and congratulate ourselves from. We're here, all of us, and we're blessed. It's a life of grace, blessing, and an awful lot of fun. Because I keep looking around everywhere, and there's humor all over the place. If you notice, if you look for it, it's there.
Thank you, Brian. That was wonderful. I've got a poem for you.
Beautiful.
Because I like to finish off with a poem. So this is by Liam Porter, and I thought it was very appropriate for you. And it's called Take Time. So take time for now. This the only moment you are sure of. Take time for friends. They will help you through the very worst days. Take time for family. You will miss them immeasurably when they are gone. Take time for work, but don't let work take all of your time. Take time to laugh. Laughter raises spirits and lifts the gloom. Take time for music. It will feed your soul and bring you joy. Take time to exercise. You have one body, you should look after it well. Take time for you. For if you keep dividing yourself, what will be left? Take time to understand that we cannot save time. We can just try to use it wisely. Take time to live.
Nice. That is gorgeous. That is absolutely gorgeous. Thank you.
So my name is Vanda Carter. This was your Fab Talk number 3. Thank you very much to our guest, Brian Dolan. You are a fab hero, Brian. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And we look forward to the next Fab Talk.
Thank you. And to everyone, stay positive and test negative.
Thank you.
Bye.